Good morning. We're going to look at Psalm 120 today. Psalm 120 is not a very long psalm, but a beautiful psalm, as you'll see in a moment here. It's called a Psalm of Ascent, and I gave it the title, A Tale of the Contrast Between Two Tongues. We're going to see good speech and evil speech and how they're contrasted. So the psalmist is trying to have control of his tongue and speak well and have peace, but the tongues that are surrounding him want evil. So, but before we read this psalm, I want to talk about this term, a psalm of ascent. And we've seen this, I think, before, but ascent means to go up.
Okay.
And
Mine says the Psalm of Degrees.
Okay, of degrees. And so where this comes from is this idea that when you would go into Jerusalem, that, and there's a little bit of debate over this, but you would go up in levels or steps. So some scholars believe that you would go up the steps of the temple and then you would say this psalm as you go up. Or the other way many people think this would be done is you would say these psalms, which isn't just 120, it'd be all the way through Psalm 130 and you would sing these psalms as you were going up to worship. Remember, when you would go to the temple, you would go 3 times a year for the Passover, Pentecost, the booth, and the Thanksgiving, but you would go up there 3 times a year for a whole week. But it would take you some time. Some people would take a week to get there. This is quite the journey. And so you would go up and you would sing these as you were going. Nowadays, it would be kind of like turning on the car radio and listening to K-Love or a Christian station as you're getting ready for church. But they're very special psalms for getting ready for going into the temple. So that gives you an idea. And on your sheet, I've got a picture of Jerusalem, modern Jerusalem, and you see the Dome on the Rock. And that's kind of the Muslims have built that building over the place where the temple was. And of course, there's the Wailing Wall, but it was on a high hill on the city. So when it says Song of Ascent or degrees, you've got to go up into this building. It's a hill, and then Jerusalem is kind of on a mini mountain, so you've got to go up from all directions to get to it. So when they say let's go up to Jerusalem, literally it doesn't mean drive north or walk north. It means you've got to go up the mountain to get there. And you kind of see that church in the background is also up on a hill in that picture. The next one's a picture of an artist's depiction of what the temple looked like back when it was in existence. And the Wailing Wall you kind of see there. And they would have had to go up again to get into it. So, and even if you're in the lower part, you've got to climb the steps. And so some people thought, well, maybe they sang the psalm as you took each step up into the temple. So let's start our Bible study together. I just want to read the psalm all the way through. So kind of let it ruminate in your mind to think about what it's saying. And then we'll go back and talk about the individual words. So I'll just read it and we'll kind of follow along. I call on the Lord in my distress, and he answers me. Save me, Lord, from lying lips and from deceitful tongues. What will he do to you? And what more besides, you deceitful tongue? He will punish you with a warrior's sharp arrows, with burning coals of a broom bush. Woe to me that I dwell in Meshech, that I live among the tents of Kedar. Too long have I lived among those who hate peace. I am for peace, but when I speak, they are for war. Do you see kind of that contrast? He's the believer. The people around him are unbelievers. They're They're liars. He tells the truth, they deceive. So there's this contrast. So if you can kind of imagine, you're going to Jerusalem, and maybe you're going to church, and you think about everything that's going on in your life, and you go, wow, I just left all these people that just won't leave me alone, and they cause me problems. I try to get them to follow God, but they do their own thing. So, but you're going to Jerusalem praying, Lord, help me from the midst of everything that's going on in my normal everyday life, and help me to get right with you in Jerusalem. And then afterwards, he's got to go right back where he was from. So a couple of things just to note. Woe to me that I dwell in Meshech. We're going to learn what that means. Meshech and Kedar. These are definitely a contrast to the temple. So, okay, let's just go through the psalm. Anything you note in this before as you're kind of ruminating on this? Anything that comes up as we kind of pray this? Any thoughts?
Mine uses different words.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, for sure. I used a kind of a different translation today. Yep. Okay. What words were different in your translation?
Coals of juniper or something like that.
Oh, the coals of the juniper bush?
Yeah.
Okay. Rather than here, I had the broom bush.
Yeah. Broom tree.
Yep, or broom tree.
Yeah.
Yep. So we'll look at that meaning too. That's kind of an interesting one. I think this is the only place in the Bible that mentions that. So I wasn't totally sure what that meant. So I looked it up for us today. So okay, well, let's go through this one verse at a time so you kind of see what it's talking about. So the first verse, I call on the Lord in my distress, and he answers me. Well, that kind of makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So my everyday trouble, my hurts, my pains, the particular word used here, what is your distress? I looked it up, and it refers to it. It's used in other parts of the Bible. And for example, in the book of Genesis, chapter 35, verse 3, Jacob was in distress after deceiving his brother Esau. Remember that whole thing? Esau is ready to kill him. And so he's running for his life. And remember, his parents say, you shouldn't do like your brother Esau and marry one of those Canaanite women. Why don't you go and marry from our own family? And so he flees to Laban's house. But on the way, remember, he lays down and puts his head on the rock at Bethel. And he has that dream of the angels ascending and descending from God. Well, that's kind of what it's talking about there. Jacob was in distress. Could you imagine a young guy like leaving home for the first time, and he's sleeping all alone with a rock for his pillow, and it's not like you're in Motel 6 even. I mean, you're out in the middle of nowhere. He could be attacked by a beast. He could be attacked by a raiding party. It's not good. He's in distress. So that's what the meaning of that word. Another time the same word is used is with Joseph. And his brothers in chapter 42:21, they remember back when they threw him into that cistern and how he pleaded for his life. And it uses the word he was in distress at the point that he could die. So this is a very, it's a term that I think it's more than just, I'm going through a little stress in my life. This is like stress to the point I could die stress. Or another place it's used is in Psalm 22. And this psalm we often read on Good Friday, thinking about how Jesus was dying on the cross. And it's a prayer for God to deliver from distress, from the point of death. So my question for you is, what is your distress like? We go through a lot of it. And I think when we go to church, that's the time to bring it to God. Lord, I've got distress with my family. I've got distress with disease. It's distressful thinking of the people in Ukraine, Russia. I was reading the other day, a lot of these people are related to each other in Russia and Ukraine, and yet they're fighting. What a horrible thing to realize that you might be pulling the trigger and killing your cousin. I mean, that's got to be horrible.
The thing that really is that Putin is telling these people to do that. They don't have to do his bidding. They don't have to, but they get paid, so I'm sure. But all these people that are following and doing all of these bad things, they showed that one tank running just over a car.
Yeah.
Nothing, no reason, nothing else around. And how he has such control.
Yeah. No, it's tough. And I'm sure if they were to, well, in our country, if you disobey an order, derelict of your duty, that's high crimes.
January 6th, so.
Yeah. So you don't dare disobey, or you're going to pay the consequences. My guess in Russia, it's probably worse than here. You might be dishonorably discharged in this country. There, you might be put to death.
But if they all ran away, then you wouldn't have anybody.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's look at verse 2. Save me, O Lord, or Lord, from lying lips, from deceitful tongues. Now, I didn't write too much about this particular verse. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Lying lips. These are just people that are trying to deceive. I brought along, let's see if I have it. Yeah, right here. Today, or this coming week in Lent, we're going to start Lent. I think in Christians all around the world, so Catholics, Lutherans, Methodists, Presbyterian, the first week of Lent, we read the story of the temptation of Jesus. And I don't know if you can see this, Carol, but it's a picture of Satan with Jesus. But Satan is the great deceiver. I mean, that's, yeah, so he is the chief liar. And I was thinking about that, and by lying, he tells 90% of the truth. That's what's so hard about it. People think, oh, Satan, the guy with the red horns and pitchfork. No, Satan is like this beautiful guy that tells mostly the truth. And that's what's so hard about temptation, is because temptations are mostly correct. And so that's what makes them so hard to say no to, because they're
The review.
yeah, they're 90% right. So remember when Satan tempted Adam and Eve, you will, eat of this fruit and you'll be like God, knowing good and evil. Was he lying? Not really. It was actually mostly true. But what he left out was the problem. By the way, eat this and you're going to die. Remember what he says, you will surely will not die. And he was kind of right. They didn't die that day. They're just going to die 800 years later.
He just didn't tell you when you were
Yeah, he see, if they didn't eat, they would never die. But, and so it goes with all of his temptations. So I think of people, sexual temptation is always big among youth. And they say, well, Satan says, this is good. Well, yeah, it is good. But there's a lot of stuff left out. Or if you just don't be fully honest, you'll feel better. Well, yeah, you'll feel better until they find out that you're lying. And then it goes on and on. If we share Jesus with others, people look down on us. Well, yeah, that could happen. But then again, they'll really respect us in the long run if we share them. So it's always better with the Lord. So that's the tough part about Satan and lying lips. Lying lips are 90% true. And so that's what the psalmist here, he's going up to Jerusalem. And he realized, Lord, it's so easy to fall into lying lips and go their way. There's a reason it's called deceit, because deceit actually feels pretty good at the time. It catches us in the long run. Okay, verse 3. This kind of builds on what we just said. What will he do to you? And what more besides, you deceitful tongue? So what's the answer to that question? What will he do? I think the question is, who is the he? Is it the people with deceitful tongues? Is it the psalmist himself? Or is it God? What will God do to you? And what more besides, you deceitful tongue?
Oh,
So probably it would be God here, because the very next verse gives the answer. He will punish you with the warriors. Let's see if I can, sharp arrows with burning coals of a broom bush.
so Kipper is
Or the juniper tree, or
is
the, yeah. So let's look at sometimes when you got a hard verse like this, poetry is written in what you call parallelism. So they say the same thing twice in a different way. So the first way he says it, he will punish you with a warrior's sharp arrows. So what is a warrior's sharp arrows? Well, that's what the warrior uses to kill the enemy. So what's the punishment? Well, God's gonna kill those who are deceitful. He's gonna put them to death. So, but then how is he gonna do it? With burning coals of a broom bush, or a juniper tree, or a broom tree. So I looked this up because I was curious, what on earth is a broom tree? So I found this explanation, and if you've got your sheet here, I wrote it out for you. The ancient rabbis say this, and I thought this was a pretty good explanation. It says the ancient rabbis explain that coals from the broom tree are unusual in that they continue burning on the inside even after they are extinguished on the outside. They compared this to a person who listens to slander. Even if you try to persuade him otherwise, he seems to be convinced he is still burning on the inside, still unconvinced. So do you see how this works? So it's kind of this idea that he will punish you in such a way that on the outside, you don't even know it's happening. It just has a way of twisting and turning into a person. And I think that's the same idea with the arrow, because an arrow won't kill you right away. It hits, and then it causes internal bleeding, and then infection, and then eventually they would die of it. Because I don't know too many people, you watch the movies and they show people, they shoot them with an arrow and they're dead right away. I mean, I don't think so. That's not how it works.
no,
That's actually from what I understand, a very painful thing to get hit by an arrow.
Show where they died on that arrow.
Yeah, or like deer, they hunt deer, they'll shoot the deer and it runs for like quite a ways, and then they got to go find the deer that you just shot. If they do it right, you hit them in the right spot and then it's quicker. But but it's, so that's the idea, that this deceit, it goes inside of you, and it kills. So God uses the very thing that is sinful to hurt the one who is using it. So another way in the Bible, the next page, and you've all heard this verse before, burning coals are mentioned several times in the scripture, usually referring to literal red hot coals of fire. However, Proverbs 25, 21 to 22 has a reference to burning coals that is probably not literal. If your enemy is hungry, give him food to eat. If he's thirsty, give him water to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head, and the Lord will reward you. So the literal part is you should feed him and give him to drink. The non-literal part is the burning coals. I mean, we wouldn't actually put burning coals on somebody's head. But by loving them, that's what happens. You show the opposite. You show the love of God instead of the punishment of God in this case. And I think that's kind of what's going on with this deceit. You can love that person that's lying to you back, and the very deceit is going to punish him. It'll get him. It'll burn from the inside. Yeah. So, and then in Romans 12:20, it quotes that as well, that when we get wronged, let the other person, it's going to burn them. Okay. You ready for the tough verse? Verse 5. Woe to me that I dwell in Meshech, that I live among the tents of Kedar. Again, I think this is a contrast between he's going to the temple, which is perfect and good. There's forgiveness there, but where he lives, it's not so good. So first, Meshech. The word Meshech, and again, I had to look all this up. This is not, Pastor Travis doesn't have this on his everyday talk, but it means a drawing out. Meshech is the son of Japheth. Remember Shem, Ham, and Japheth, Noah's 3 sons. So this is the grandson of Japheth, or of Noah. So it would be Japheth's son. And his son moved into the north of Israel. And I looked this up. It says descendants of Meshech often mentioned in connection with Tubal, Magog, and the northern nations, including Moshki, a people on the borders of Clochis and Armenia. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, this isn't God's people. This is people that live up to the north that cause problems. So the idea is that he lives among people that aren't believers. And so it's tough. But does God want these people to be saved too? Yep.
Yeah.
He does.
He wants everybody.
He wants everybody saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth. Now, Kedar, though, is mentioned a number of times, and it is also contrast. Kedar means like black. And I know we live in a very politically charged time right now. When you talk about black and white, people think, ooh, that's racism and sexism and different things. But in the Bible, and sometimes black can symbolize evil, but skin color doesn't. I don't want you to get that idea. But in the Song of Songs, chapter 1, verse 5, it mentions that this woman that is in love with Solomon, she is has skin like these tents of Kedar, which means they are black. They're beautiful black skin. So she, I don't know if you realize that, but so if you think that somehow the Bible is racist, I don't think so, because in the Song of Solomon, the character, the Shulamite woman, she is very black, and she's the wife of Solomon, and they're in love. So I kind of think of biblically, people don't know their Bible very well if they're truly racist, because even in the Bible, now Solomon is Jewish, so he wouldn't be white, he wouldn't be black, he'd be kind of the Hebrew people are kind of in between. So but the Shulamite woman, she's very, very black. Not like in the United States, most of our people are, they're darker skin and there's whiter skin, but they're not, I mean, you go over to Africa, you would see somebody that's very black, like we're talking here. So, and then in Isaiah, it talks about so when you think of the tents of Kedar, think of so the materials made out of very black, they're dark. So we think of tents, we think of white tents, but here you should think of black. So I found this explanation on patheos.com. And I thought this was helpful. I'll just read it and you'll kind of see the point. It says the similes in Song of Solomon 1 verse 5, where it's talking about the Shulamite woman, confirm the meaning of Kedar. She is black but beautiful, like the tents of Kedar. What do we know about Kedar? Well, on the surface of things, there is a double connection with blackness. Kedar's tents would be black. Kedar also means to blacken, and so the connection is multiple. But the comparison with the tents of Kedar brings up another set of reinforcing associations. Kedar is the son of Ishmael. Isn't that interesting? Remember, Ishmael is the firstborn of Abraham. Remember, Abraham was supposed to have a son with Sarah, but he didn't exactly trust God, and so they did this thing with kind of adulterous thing, and Ishmael gets born, but he's rejected, the rejected firstborn, the firstborn who has moved out to make room for Isaac, the second-born son. He is the proto-Israel, in other words, the firstborn of Abraham, who is blessed and bears 12 sons who become princes. Did you know that Ishmael had 12 sons? So did Abraham. Isaac and Jacob. Jacob has 12 sons. The angel in the wilderness tells Hagar that her son will be a wild donkey of a man whose hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand will be against him. Ishmael is a man of the east. Her beauty is like the tents of Ishmael that carries these various associations. Isn't that interesting? So it's so Kedar is also linked to Arabia in various places. The closest is Ezekiel's prophecy against Tyre. Tyre is going to lose all her trading partners, among them Arabia and all the princes of Kedar. The nomadic herdsmen and sheiks of Arabia and Kedar bring their animals to Tyre to trade. Kedar is also mentioned twice in Isaiah, in an oracle concerning Arabia, and in Isaiah 42:11. They are dwellers in the wilderness. For the psalmist, and that's what we're talking about here, Kedar, is a place of exile and distant from God. So you kind of get the idea that, like the Shulamite woman, she's from a far off place. These sheiks of Arabia, they're from a far off place. And so let's go to the next one. But Isaiah envisions a time when the flocks of Kedar will be brought not to Tyre, but to Zion, when the animals that are raised in the wilderness will become ministers on Yahweh or the Lord's altar. Again, there is a note of I can't even say that word, exoticism, Orientalism in the description of the precious riches of the East that will come with the flock of Kedar into Jerusalem. You remember that passage? The camels will come from Kedar, and that's prophesying the wise men coming from the East to bring, remember, gold, incense, and myrrh to Jesus as part of the pilgrimage of the nations to Yahweh's house. Even the most exotic, distant peoples and their treasures will be brought into the renewed Jerusalem. Whoa! So what's the point? Let's look at that. So the point is, woe to me that I dwell in Meshech, that I live among the tents of Kedar. So the psalmist is basically saying, I live in these far off places, and now I'm coming to Jerusalem. But guess what? God wants even far off people to come to the temple. You see kind of the association. So as they're singing this coming up to the temple, it's kind of reminding that God wants people that are near Jerusalem and people that are far, people that are in awful situations and good, are all to come to Jerusalem. So no matter how you feel, whether you're at Calvary or you're at Methodist Church or Catholic Church, God wants you. He wants you to come to him. And I think that's the point of Kedar. I live in this exotic, different sort of place, but God wants me to come to. I had one more page. Sorry. It says Kedar's tents thus evoke something wild and untamed, a beauty that is exotic and alien, a beauty associated not with the lush fullness of the garden, but with the harsh clarity of the desert, a beauty that is other. It's a beauty associated not with the stable and settled life of the city, the daughters of Jerusalem, but with the transient nomadic life of Arab Bedouins. Yet the very strangeness of her beauty is part of the bride's fascination with her lover. Okay, you got all that down?
I don't remember. Yeah, it'll come back to me in pieces, but I
Yeah.
cannot just remember.
So I guess you don't need to know all that, but I think the point is, woe to me that I dwell in Meshech, that I live among the tents of Kedar. I'm woe because I'm so far away, but thank God that he allows me to come to him. I think that's the point. Yeah. And even though we live in the United States and there's problems, and we can still go to God. Okay, let's look at the last two verses. These are a little bit more straightforward. Too long have I lived among those who hate peace. And I think that has kind of a double meaning here. Because where does only true peace come from? But from God. The Lord bless you and keep you, and the Lord give you peace. So when you have the Lord, you have peace. But if you live among Kedar and Meshech and liars and deceivers, they might not be fighting, but they don't have true peace. So this can refer to a spiritual peace. But then on the other end, if you don't have the Lord, you're going to end up with a lot of turmoil in your life anyway. So you're to hate peace. They're always wanting to fight, always wanting war. And that's kind of what we're experiencing in our world again. And we don't understand it. Why do they want war? But yep, there it is. Why is there fighting among you? The book of James says, because you want something and you don't get it. You pray for it and you still don't get it. And so then you fight and kill and yeah. So, okay. And then the very final verse, and I think this is kind of the point of the Psalm. I am for peace, but when I speak, they are for war. So he's kind of reflecting as he's going up to Jerusalem, whether climbing those steps. I don't know if you can kind of picture that, or climbing the steps, or walking or riding a donkey or a camel. We're going for peace, but everybody I live around is for war. And it's tough. And again, I don't know if this is as much talking about war as in literal war. It can be, but it's also the war that we face against Satan and the devil, that he wants us to be constantly at war. He wants us to be fighting with our friends, our neighbors, our family.
Never been.
Yep. And he does that so he'll destroy our relationship with God. But that's why we go to church. That's why we go to the temple, so that we can have peace and forgiveness and be restored again. That's why the wise men came, to worship him in Bethlehem, so that they could have peace. We'll stop right there. Next week, we'll look at Psalm 121.